run through the basics of Houdini. So to start off with, you're going to open up Houdini Apprentice. Should look like this. Should hopefully have the software already downloaded. Run through the basics of Houdini. So to start off with, whoever's got the speaker on, can you mute, please? Can you mute, Rob, please? Thank you. Yeah, so you should have Houdini Apprentice here, and then yeah. So to start off with, we're going to change to the technical view. This just makes it a bit more easy for some of the bits. So I'm going to just explain the interface a bit. So first of all, we have the viewport, which is a 3D area for just like seeing what's going on in the scene, everything like this. Over here is the node area where we're going to connect up all of our nodes. And down here is where you'll see the parameters for those nodes. So first of all, these are the three main windows. You'll see these ones in a little bit, but we're just going to focus on these at the moment. But to add a node in, you press tab, and it brings up this menu here. And you just type in what you're searching for. So the first node we're going to add in is a geometry node. And this is just like a container, basically, for geometry. So you can have anything from like fog to mesh, anything going on in there. And it's just like a way of partitioning things in the scene. So this one, you just double click on the name. And then we're going to just change it to terrain, like this. And then double click and go inside. Now you're in that container of terrain, as you see here. And then again, we're going to just press tab and search for grid. When we put that in, you see it just brings a grid into the screen. Now to zoom in and out, you just hold spacebar and scroll, or two fingers with a touchpad. You also click to move around, so you can see the grid here. As you can see all the parameters down in the bottom right. You can see it's been divided into, well, it's set size 10 by 10. We'll leave it at that because we want to work quite small and fast. But for the rows, we're going to just change that to 50 by 50. You see it's just subdivided it into a lot more pieces. Now, the next thing we're going to add is an attribute bot. This is basically another way of visual coding other than this higher scale. But to connect them up, we're going to just connect this node to here. And that's just like, it's like English, so it's top to bottom, left to right is the order that you connect these in. So it goes from this grid down to this bot here. And then to see that bot, you press the blue there, and it will just be showing what's going on here. Now, we'll go inside this attribute bot. Actually, I'm going to just name this as well, terrain noise. And this will give you some idea of what we're going to be doing inside here. But as you see inside, this is another way of visual programming. But instead of being like holistic and taking the whole grid and passing it down and like applying everything to that whole grid, this one runs over the points. So all the points you can visualize by pressing this button here. You can see them here. So for every point, this will just like do a calculation to it, basically. So you can see inside, you have all these, but yeah, so we're going to be playing with that first of all. The first node we're going to add into this attribute bot, and this one, different to the other one, goes left to right. So it's like different, but yeah, you probably noticed that already. But yeah, and then we're going to just press tab again to search for a new node. I'm going to go normal. We're going to put displace along normal. I'm just going to drop this on the line that we've created, and it will just drop in between. Now this one, literally does what it says on the box. It displaces the mesh along the normals. So if we move this displace amount in the parameters down here, we just move that up, you'll see it just actually moves the whole mesh up because it's one constant value for the whole mesh. Now a way of changing this is by adding a new node in. So we just click and drag out of there and add in noise. And then we just take the noise, put the noise out and put it into the scale. And now this should work. Now if we change the displace amount, you should see the noise coming in there, and it just deforms the sheet, or the grid, sorry, into random turbulence, basically. Now, one thing you can do with this that makes it really nice and controllable, like taking it up to this level, so we don't have to go inside every time, is to promote parameters. So for this one, for changing the frequency here, and if you've got a mouse, you can do this by just pressing the center button and then choosing what scale you want, and it just changes it like that, or a bit more smoothly like this. But yeah, to get that in a nicer function, so it's not in 3 values and not inside this node, we can promote this parameter. And I'll put on this little green thing here. And this is basically like a controller that you'll see from the layer above. We're going to call it frequency large. We're going to change the type to a float, the automatic value or the default value to 1, and then the float range to 2. Now this means that when we go to the level above, if you're in this block on the attribute block node there, means that you can change that scaling here from up above. So it's really key to choose which like parameters you want to be tweaking. So the 2 that I would mainly use on this is the amplitude and the frequency. So I'll put another promote parameter on the amplitude and call this amplitude large. Yeah, so default is 1, float range -1 to 1. That's perfect. So that will give us just one level of noise that we control from the level above. Nice and easy. But sorry, I'm going to go back into that block. But how do we make that more complex and more nice? So another thing we can do is add, I normally use 3 layers of noise. And this just gets you really nice detail. So we're just adding in 2 more nodes of that noise attribute. We're going to be connecting up the position again. Is everybody following on okay?
Yes.
And then inside these, we're going to just promote these parameters again. So this one, we're going to call it frequency medium. And we're going to set this to a float. And we're going to set the default to 0.5. Keep it between 0 and 1. Now what I'd normally do is you change, oh wait, my bad. I'm going to change that to 2, put that to 5. Now what you normally do is you double the frequency and half the amplitude. This is just a good rule for creating like nice intricate layers of noise. So on the amplitude here, just drop it down to around about 0.5. And then that's amplitude medium, perfect. And then this one is change the frequency again. Once we've got this set up, though, you can just copy and paste this whole node instead. So it's really nice. And then we're going to change this to default of 5. and then put a range of 10 on that. And I'll show you, oh, that's frequency small, perfect. And the amplitude, I'm going to change the amplitude to small, and then put the default to 0.25. Now to add all of these three values together, we just use an add. So that's tab and type add. Put that in, make that in there, this in here. And you see it gets a much nicer variance of noise on the surface. And it means that you can get, when you're in this upper level here, you can just change all the values like this from above. And it's good to keep the values well labeled, because then you can easily just go through it all. But yeah, another thing we're going to add to this as well is one more thing that'll make it a bit more. Ooh, let me increase the. Just do that. One more thing we're going to add in is a clamp function. Lots of the normal math functions that you have in coding and stuff like this are just in here. Maybe slightly different names you'll see, but they're all very similar. And with this, you see it automatically clamps the base off to 0. So it creates these nice like valley floors. But what we can do is promote the parameter, and instead of having it limiting to 0, it's have it going from -1 to 1. So when we're on the, oh, I didn't change the name. This is one we're going to call clamp valley. And then when we come in here, there you go, and just clamp the lower levels. Now at the moment it's a bit rough, so what we're going to do is create a subdivide, just add it in between. As you see, it just gives a bit more detail to those forms. We can put a level of 2 to it. You see you get really nice, quite complicated terrain from all this noise. You can have a play with those functions in your own time, but I'm going to just move on quickly. Now when you've done a nice chunk like this, just good housekeeping is to put a null at the end. Now these nulls, you color them in red, or that's what I do, and you do that by pressing C, and it brings this up, or you can use the colors up here. You can also use post-it notes to document stuff, so you can be like terrain, or you can even use, if you highlight the whole lot, you can even put them inside a container with a title like terrain. Pretty good. But I'm not going to do that. Anyway, back to this null. What you need to do is you need to type out in capitals. And this just means that it headlines at any submenu. So it's like the first options that you'll get when choosing this object. Don't worry about that too much. You'll see in a second. But we're going to call it out terrain and then basic. Now we're going to jump back into, we're going to highlight that in blue. And then we're going to just jump back to the main menu, the main OBJ menu. And we're going to create a new geometry. Now this geometry, we're going to call copy. And then I'm just going to take you through a couple of really powerful copying tools for putting like scenery on the object, on the terrain. So inside this one, the first node we're going to create is a merge object merge, sorry. And then we choose, this is the object that we're choosing to merge with it. And you go into the menu here. And then we want to go inside the terrain object. And you see how it's got the out terrain basic straight at the top. This is what I was talking about. Means that we can just press accept and it brings that straight in. So it's really good. So now we have this form here. Actually, I totally forgot one thing. One thing that we really need to do for this terrain is that we actually need, for this copying, is to create a parameter, like a global parameter almost, or an objective parameter, I guess. But what we're going to do is take these noise levels here that control the terrain, so the height of these points here, we're going to take it out before the clamping, because we want to have like a nice diversity of it. And we're going to just put this into a bind. Oh, sorry, not a bind export. When you put that in, we're going to call this terrain, and you'll see we go down to this bottom menu here, create a new pane, inspector, and then geometry spreadsheet. You'll see that we've now got a global variable called terrain. If you go before, it's not there. No, it's there. So these are all the point positions, and then there's the terrain. This is just good for checking your numbers, and making sure everything's working how you want it to. But anyway, back into the copies. Sorry, I should have done that earlier. But we've got our object in here with these terrain numbers at the bottom. Now what we need to do is press tab, and we're going to do a scatter. Now what this scatter does, as it says on the box, just scatters points on the node, I guess. Scatters points all over the mesh, all over it. So it's really good for just like allocating random objects over it. The one thing is that it's all very even. One thing we can change with that is by changing the density attribute down here, and changing this by pressing the button to terrain. So now you see it goes to the top of the mesh, because that's where the 1 is, and the zeros, or the negatives, are at the bottom. Another way of viewing that is by actually just connecting this number here to CD, and you see that 1, where it's white, is at the top, and then negatives are where it's black at the bottom. But anyway, and you can just connect that to the CD. This is good for viewing numbers in another way as well. But yeah, so if we go into copies in the scatter, we don't really want it on top of the mountains. We want it like on top of in the valleys. So for this, what we do is create a new attribute pot. Just pop it in here, in between. And then inside of this one, we're going to have a bind. And this bind is going to bring in that parameter terrain. And it's going to put this through a fit range, which you guys might know as a map. And for this function, we know that the minimum of terrain, and this is how you can press the arrow at the top so you can order it. The minimum of terrain is minus 0.5, and the maximum of terrain is, we're just going to put it 0.5. It's pretty much there. And then and then from here, we're going to inverse it as well. So we're going to put a 1 and a 0, so that we just create different order of numbers. Oh, no, wait, I am being silly there. So 0.5 to a minus 0.5, I believe. Yeah. Oh, I haven't even connected it up. I'm being silly. Anyway, we put it into a bind export. I'll get back to that in a second. Connect it to a terrain. Now you see the numbers all over it. Now if we bring this number down, minus 0.5, how it was before. And then if you bring it down to 0, you actually see that it's all in the values now. Sorry for that confusion. I was right. So it's all in the valleys instead of on top of the hills. Now what you can do for this, again, is promote parameter. Put this between, because it's between minus 0.5, just put it between -1 and -1. Put automatically on 0 and change this to, call it density control. We can change this to density as well. And then on the upper level, on the scatter, I'm going to change this to density. This just means that we can keep that terrain parameter as well as the density one. And from up here, we can move it further down, so it's really isolated. And this is why you wanted the terrain data, because instead of flattening off to the bottom, you actually have continual data throughout this flat part here. If that makes sense. So it's not clamped, basically. But yeah, so now we have those points there. We're going to copy objects to them. So the first node we're going to use is a copy to points. And one thing that's always handy is just like hovering over, especially if it's got 2 nodes, hovering over the node, seeing what it says. So this is target points to copy to, which is our lovely scattered points that we've got. And then we're going to add in up here just a simple tube. Now, if you visualize this, it's all terrible because the tube's way too big. So we're going to just scale down that tube by selecting it, changing the radius all the way down to something reasonable, and then the height as well. Now you see how they've been copied halfway down. This is mainly because, well, this is because their center's in their center. One way of changing that is to copy, to go to the height parameter, and this is used for a lot of objects. It's a really good way of centering them on the bottoms. It's the copy parameter, then you go to center, into the Y, which is the vertical, and you right click, you go paste relative reference times 0.5. So what this does is that it takes this number here, automatically takes it in as the CH brackets height, and then times it by 0.5, so it's just half of the height goes vertically. This means that you can have changing objects like this, where they always stay static on the bottom. Actually, I forgot one more thing as well, and this is to normalize the mesh. Now this will actually turn all of these on their side. This is my mistake. Sorry. This is because when you normalize, it means that they keep, if you see on the terrain, how they've got different angles now. It's following how the terrain moves. So what we do is we rotate it 90 degrees in the X and then move it at height in the Z. And it will do exactly the same effect. But if we go into the terrain, I'll just show you this quickly, and we bring in, let's say, a sphere, and we'll change that into polygons, up the frequency, connect it in. You'll see that now they point off in the right direction. And you get a pretty funky sphere. But anyway, I'll just bring it back to the plane for you. But that's the benefit of yeah. I wonder why that clamp's gone like that. Give me 1 second. Sorry. Okay, cool. So cool. Now we've done the first copy there's a couple of things that we can add for variance. So one good way of randomizing these points is by adding attribute randomize. The base of this one is for color, and you'll see that it automatically just changes every single point into a different color. If you want to copy this, you can just press Alt and click, and this happens to any node. Copies all of its settings and everything. It's very helpful. It's just Alt click. And then we can also change something called P-scale. And this changes the scale of the objects as well. So we want to have that as a dimension 1, because it's not color, which is a dimension 3. And we want to change it between 0.2 and 1, just so they're not too small. Does that make sense? I feel like I'm going quite fast. Cool. So now you have a field of randomly colored and randomly heighted objects. But there's another way of copying that's a lot cleaner, or gives you a lot more skill. Control, I guess, would be the right word. This one is copy stamping. Copy stamping allows you to basically, so we're going to copy in those points again to the right hand side, but it basically allows you a lot more control over like what objects, what rotation at each point, instead of just like mainly color and scale, which you get with these points. So I'm going to just bring in copy over this by pressing Alt and dragging it. I'm just connecting this one up to here. And then if we press the blue, we'll see it. It's pretty much the same as the copy in the first place. But if we drag the drag the random color over, we can actually, like, it seems to have not worked. But it's actually, if you go into attributes, you go use inside the copy one, so the copy stamping, you go to the attributes, you go to use template point attributes. It will copy all the attributes over to the new forms. The thing is, we don't want that. Well, I personally don't want that because it's a lot of stuff. If you look down here, we've got all the density, the terrain, all of these other bits. All I actually really want from that is just the color. So you see how it's just slimmed down to the points and the color there. Now what we're going to do here is add in a new attribute wrangle. Now this is, compared to the visual coding, this is a way of doing everything by actual code. Yeah, it depends what you prefer doing, but you can literally do anything through any of these like portholes. So you can do everything through visual coding, everything through the actual coding. I tend to use this for just like short grubby bits. Well, not grubby bits, but like little exchanges, whereas the VOPs are more for like the layering of noise and that kind of thing. This is just more for, well, you'll see. So the first thing we're going to create is, let's do an at height. And then for this, we'll do a rand brackets. Oh, sorry, I totally did not explain that very well. So before any variable that you bring in or you create, you have to put an at function. So I'm creating a function called at height. You can also put f in front of it to make it a float, or I, or v, but it will understand that this is a float. So yeah, height equals rand, and then you go brackets at p, and this will create a rand number. Actually, I do need to put an f at the start there. So a random number from the point, from its point in space, and then between 0 and 1. So you see here, This is created totally random numbers between 0 and 1. What we do to use this to control the actual height of these points here is to go into this copy stamp node, go into stamp, and with this you stamp inputs. Make sure that's ticked. This is a classic error. I've done that many times. And then you choose a variable name. So for this one, I'm going to call it height. Then in here, we're going to do at. So we're pointing at that variable, and then height. And with this, we, so with this, basically what this does is it allows us to, through the stamp function, we can actually get this number back out. So what we're going to put in is a transform node in here. Put a transform node in here, and then on the uniform scale, we're going to type in the stamp, and then brackets. And then, as you see, it comes up with this helpful menu here, or a little info blog, and it says it needs a string. It needs a scope, a token of value. The scope is the path to the node, to the copy node that we've been using. The token is the name that we gave it, which was height, and then the default value that it should go to if there's nothing being stamped to it. So first of all, we need to open the string, and then you do .. to get back a folder to this main area instead of inside this node. And then you type in copy, and then that goes to the copy node. And then this one, we go for height, because that's the attribute that we want to get. And then for the default, we'll go for 0.5, which doesn't really matter because it should change now. So now you see it's very much the same as p scale, but it just shows that you can choose individual variables for it. So what we can do for that is also be a bit cheeky and use one variable, if you're a little bit lazy, to control 2 outputs. So we're just copying it into the z of the rotate and timesing it by 360. So the number between 0 and 1 changes to between 0 and 360. Ooh, I put it on the wrong axis. Don't know why it's being so funky. Why I'm being funky. Is it this one here? Nope. Okay. Yeah. So then this will provide rotation. You can't really see it because they're not very defined meshes, but you'll see it in a second. As the next thing we're going to do is also add in a new like object choice, basically, so it can choose from a number of bits of scenery. So inside this attribute wrangle, we're going to just put in a new line. We're going to basically copy and paste this. We're going to do f at, and then we're going to go obj. Actually, we're going to change this to I, so it's integer obj, and this is at p times at p, just so it's different from the at p rand of the height. So we don't get the same small objects for small objects, if that makes sense. And we're going to change it times, no, I think it should be fine like that. We'll see in a sec, but I'm pretty sure it's good. Yeah, so the next thing we're going to do is go back down to the copy stamp, add in obj. For this one, we're going to do at obj, and this will be bringing in there we go, don't do the I. Sorry, my bad. I was just hoping for an integer. But anyway, so in the copy stamp, we've got the obj, and then up here, we're going to add in a switch, which is basically a way of choosing between two node paths. It's quite handy visually. And we're also going to add in a platonic solid, which is just a really nice, simple form, so it runs really quickly. This being said, you can literally do this with any objects you have online in any form. Yeah, do whatever you fancy, really. Oh. Cool. So in the object here, I know I'm just gonna size it down to roughly 0.12, just because I know. And then we're gonna put in this one here, we're gonna do the same again. So that's stamp, open brackets, and then we're gonna put in that string, taking us back to the copy one node where we stamped it. I'm gonna put a comma in, and then for this one, we're going for obj, so that's the name we gave to it, the token we gave to it, and then I'm going to go for 0 as the default, not O, 0, that's the default, and then hopefully, there you go. Now, in fact, I should change that from, if we go into the platonic one, I'm going to change it to an icosahedron and even scale it down even further, 0.1. Now you get this scene with varying objects of scale and color and everything, all in the valleys. It's looking pretty cool. Yeah, so hopefully you've got a vague understanding of how these visual coding bits work. I'm gonna, of course, just finish off this node here with a null, which we're gonna color in red and change the name to out, and then copy, stamp, and view that. So now we should have a scene here, these little weird tree things. So that's what we're aiming for here, with icospheres in the middle, or scattered around. Now, with this kind of stuff, it's quite nice because you can just create a scene like this and then just reach around, try and find some bits that you like the look of. So like this angle here is looking pretty cool. There we go. I don't know. Yeah, we'll just go for that there. We won't rush too much. But yeah, and then when you're in that angle where you want to be viewing, I'm going to quickly run you through rendering. Sorry, I should have said that. But yeah, to get to that angle, you just go to this angle here, and then you go over the camera and you press Control click. And this just adds a camera into exactly where you're viewing. Have a bit more control sometimes from this camera angle, and I just move it around a little bit so I get the nice frame that I want. Now, this is where the environment maps that I told everyone to prepare with comes in handy. So we're going to add in an environment light. In the environment light, you go in here, and you go to download. Well, I go to downloads, and then you choose the environment that you want. This one is just a basic studio. It's just quite well lit, so I'm using that. If you go into render, you can already render it out, but it will be very basic shaders on top. think I'm going to run you through the shadering bit really fast as well. So this, we can actually probably turn the environment light down the light exposure. Just here, just turn that down a little bit. Well, for me, I don't know. See how yours are looking, and then go from there. So next we want to start adding in materials. So for this, you're in the Object tab. You want to go to the Material tab there, and we're going to just work from prefabs. Normally, well, pretty much every shader in here, apart from a few. So like the volumetric shader, or some of the glow shader, I think not from the principal shader, but most of them work from this, which is like a all-in-one shader produced by Disney. You'll see how they've like made the interface for it in this. But yeah, we're going to go for the prefab, so that's basically that principal shader loaded in with some bits and pieces. So we're going to just scroll down, and I'm going to go for natural, and we're going to get some rocks, and then also some dirt. And you can either highlight it and click this arrow, or just drag and drop it in. And also I wanted the coated metal as well, just to add a bit of variance. So first thing you can do is literally just drag and drop a material over the mesh that you want it on. That's like the most basic way. So if you see now, it's totally changed the color. This material's also got deformation on it, and some roughness textures, lots of other bits thrown in that will just make it look cool. One thing I have a problem with this texture is the displacement, because it's crazy. So a quick fix for that is just to go click on the dirt texture and the displacement, just go down to textures, click the texture off, and I'll go back to normal. And then I want to use noise texture, because this is less repetitive and much nicer. And then we'll jump the amplitude of that down to something like 0.061, something really low. And you'll see in a second that it should create a much nicer, there you go. So if you see how it's created these really cool earthy textures, really basic, but it's really nice. We're also using the texture panes, so you get this nice cracking of stuff and random bits. But yeah, so that's how to do it for an object. But for these scattered things, we're going to do them individually materialed. So we need to go back to the object window. So to do that, we go on this window here, and then press this top bar, go down to object, but you can just press back until you get there. But that's the official way, I guess. But yeah, so as you see in here, if you click on the terrain, which is this big bottom bit, you go to render, we've now got the dirt in the material. For this one here, for the copies, we don't have anything yet. We don't actually want to have anything, because these want to be individually rendered. And if you have a material on here, it will like dominate basically and overwrite the materials on the inside. So to do this, all we do is we go add literally. So we go back into this copies node and literally just add a material node. And we'll add it to the platonic solid first. Now for the platonic solid, I'm going to go into this option menu. So for the material, on the materials, it's this menu here on the right hand side, and choose materials, and then go for coated metal paint. And this will give us some sort of like, I was doing this earlier. Okay, kept on glitching out because it doesn't like it. So what we're going to do quickly is jump in, because it thinks it's the materials are on a point level now because of that node. So what we're going to do is jump into the terrain, and then we're going to just add in a material node here, just below the out terrain. And then in this one, we're going to add the lovely dirt. You'll see it's just popped back in there. Sorry, my bad. But yeah, so now we have our cool metal coated plated icospheres, I think they are. One problem with the coated metal paint is if we go into that material tab, click the coated metal paint, but it's red. I don't want that. I want it white, just because then we get all of those different. See how the colors go back to normal. We get all the point colors that we put in earlier. And that's because we've got this use point color attribute here as well, which will blend those colors into the base color here. I know I'm going very fast over shaders, but this is quite a big area, and I just wanted you to get something quite cool rendered out. So the last thing we're going to add in as well is a material node for the tube. And for this one, we're going to be adding, I know it sounds bizarre, but rocks. And this is for basically just the deformation, because it makes them look really cool. And I found that they look like those trees. If you saw the picture that I made for this, it's actually the scene. And we're going to go down into the rocks material, into the displacement tab. I'm going to go down. I'm going to change the effect scale a little bit, just so it's not too overpowering. Yeah. Yeah, so there we go. We've got this kind of funky looking scene with all the trees and everything. One thing that I'm going to show you more is how to work with the shader VOPs as well. So this is working in this tab here. So that's the same as the VOPs that we used for like the noise for creating the terrain. You work in a very similar way here. So to bring in a number, you do bind. And this time we're going to bring in terrain. And one good tip is when you're making edits that you don't want to see immediately, you can just pause the render and it'll make it a lot faster, especially when you're doing shaders, which this is all the material shaders. And then from this, we're going to add in a ramp parameter. This parameter is really helpful because it takes any number between 0 and 1, and then you can use it to drive a scale of color. So if we actually add this into base color here, I'm going to put up roughly 2/3 of the way the color purple. So you just click in, and it creates a new node. Press this arrow here, drops down this menu, and you choose the color that you want. And I'm going to go for this like muddy yellow, just to give us some funky alien colors. And then if it loads, should see that it's just got that variance in it, hopefully, if everything's been done right. I think I know why. And it is because I have not, the noise is running between, the noise that we use for this terrain here is running between 0.5, minus 0.5 and 0.5. So what we're going to just do is add in a constant of 0.5. And this should sort it out, hopefully. But yeah, this is why it's better. There you go. So now we get that fading terrain. You can do this in the VOPs that we did earlier by putting it to vertex colors as well. How we did for these for these trees. You can also do it for points on a grid. I just thought it'd be interesting to show you this side. Another thing, and we'll just pause the render, is setting up camera really nicely. So if you want something like depth of field, the quickest way to do it is just to jump into the main object scene, click on the camera, and then if you look at the camera, you see this long blue beam coming out of the front of it. If you just right click on that, click focus handle, now you should see this. This center point is like the main point of focus, and these two outer arrows like what the focus area is. So it's just a really easy, understandable way of focusing something basically. So I'm going to just bring it forward a little bit. There you go. And then this, to get that working, you've got to go to the out section here. Oh, and another thing with the camera is actually if you want to change this manually, you can do it all from inside the camera in the view. You can change the resolution size, near clipping, far clipping. Like with the Ingrid one that I did with those reflective metal cubes, if you remember that one was done by increasing the near clipping, so it cut out the first few layers of cubes, so you got them in the reflection, but you didn't see them. So you can do like nice tricks like this in the 3D world. But yeah, so now we've got it focused. We want to go to the out menu. You get this one mantra node, which is the renderer that we're using. Most of the settings will be fine. I won't go over them now. I can talk to you more about that in person if you want. But the main thing is if we go in this rendering tab here, and then you get enable depth of field. And if we go back to the render it out, you should see these trees aren't the best I've done them, but they're okay. But yeah, you should see that these guys are a bit more blurry in the background. But it will render out. And I did this because it was quite a fast rendering scene as well. I've had some where it can take an hour to render something out, so this rendering out in 2 minutes isn't so bad. How's everyone feeling? Are they overloaded, or do you want a little bit more? Hello?
A bit overloaded. But I get the general flow of how it works, which is useful, very useful.
Yeah. Oh, what does the null actually do? That's a good question. It does nothing. It's basically just a placeholder, if that makes sense. So it's just like a good way of having like an end point on something.
Okay.
Were there any more questions as well? I was going to do one more small process that's really powerful as well. But it depends how you're feeling. I can do it another day as well. Okay. I'll just do it really fast. Cool. So if we do one more geometry node, and we'll pause this from rendering, and we'll go back to the main scene here as well. Yeah, we'll get rid of the copies so you can't see them anymore. We'll get rid of the terrain as well. And then this one is attribute transfer. And this is just a really powerful tool just for, I'll show you, you'll see. It basically transfers attributes across space to different objects so you can use them to control things from like from like arbitrary objects, if that makes sense. So what we're going to do is bring in an object merge. This object merge, we're going to bring in the terrain again. So this terrain here. Then we're going to bring this down. First of all, we're going to create a sphere, which is going to be our arbitrary object for controlling. There you can see the sphere in the middle. I'm going to just scale it down a little bit. And then what we're going to do is basically create a volume from that sphere with an ISO offset. So if we press this one here, so you see the sphere is just a volume there. We're going to up this to 60. Now, why we're turning it into a volume is just to scatter again, but the scatter means that we can scatter into 3D space because it's from a volume. So there you see it. Here's the point scattered. Now, if we do an attribute create, I just do first one as CD, which is color. And then I go for 3 dimensions. And then we go for the value of 1 in the R. And it should turn it out red. So there you go. Here are our red points. So what we're going to do now is from these red points is copy that color to this mesh here. And how we're going to do that is just through attribute transfer. And again, so this is the right one, says it's the required geometry to transfer attributes from. So this will be from the sphere there. And then this is the geometry to have it transferred to. And you'll see it automatically turns the whole thing red straight away. Now we don't want that. So what we're going to do is first of all change the conditions, change the distance threshold, and you see it coming in, going out. I'm going to just quickly change the default to white so it's a bit nicer, so you can see the terrain more clearly. Yeah, so now you have the threshold here, and now you see the red coming across. Now what you can do is that you can use this for controlling different things. So what I was doing it for is controlling, in a VOP, is controlling like the scale at which we disturb like the terrain, if that makes sense. So inside this VOP, we can take the color, and you could run it by a different attribute, but I'm just going to use the red because we've already got it here. We go vector to float. So it splits this color into the 3 channels, so the R, G, B. And then we're going to take the R value. We're going to just take the R value and times. I'm going to bring in bind. I'm going to bring in the terrain parameter that we had. Bring that in. And then this is going to get a teeny bit messy. Yeah. So bring this one up here. Connect that to the P as well. So the points have been split into the three vectors, 3 floats as well. And then we go float to vector, float to vector. And what we're going to do is just connect this one to this one, this one to this one. And you'll see if we connect that up, then we should get just a flat. And then if we actually take the R and we multiply that by the terrain and then put this in, this is changing the R, so this is a 0 or 1, multiplied by the terrain, which is the value at which these have been offset. We put that into the y-axis here. Ooh. That's where I've been silly. Sorry. That's in here. Sorry, I shouldn't have set this to white because that's actually made the whole thing one. But yeah, so here you see how it just deforms in that one space, if you can see that. And then if we're to move this object, so if we go for a transform, if we're to animate this object, you see how it moves through the form and it stretches the terrain as it goes. Now you can blend it a bit nicer by changing the blend width, bits like this. But yeah, you set the attributes in here as well. But yeah, so then you have, this is a really, really rushed attribute transfer. But yeah, so you have that. And then you can also put this inside, I'll show you very quickly as well, something called a solver. Oh, did I miss it? I've got a solver here. So for a solver, what we want to do is connect this up to second input, connect this up to the first input. Basically what a solver does means that we can copy these, cut them out. It basically repeats the last frame onto the new frame, if that makes any sense. So how do I explain it? So it's like a loop. So it keeps it copies on everything that happened before. So what we're going to do is connect this one up to, make that one up to there, and then this one up to here, and it will create this. But if we animate our sphere, so on frame 0, we're going to have it here, alt click, and that keyframes it. On the next frame, we want it over there. We go alt click, then it should hopefully. Did I not? I didn't keyframe it. Silly me. There we go. And then if we press alt click on here, and it'll be keyframed. But yeah, and you'll see that the solver should, if you see, it will keep the red in between. So it relays that information that red was there, and those parameters were there. So it means that you can like track this object through it. So it transfers like anything to it, like shaders, deformations, the amount that you can, the amount of particles produced from that point. Anything really is like very much like coding. I don't know if it's been helpful, but I hope so. But yeah, there's some bits. I'm gonna put the whole files online for you guys as well and share it all well documented. So you've got an overview, but these are just all these are the three main bits of VOPs, copy stamping, and attribute transfer. I'm gonna go into dynamics maybe next time, or with a select few people. I don't know, that's a bit more technical, but it's still really good. And you can do a lot with, today I was trying to stay away from the shelf tools, which are these at the top, because you can do a lot with those. But I was just staying away from them because I thought it'd be good to understand like the nitty gritty of Houdini and that kind of bit. But yeah, I hope it's been helpful anyway. Cool. So I'm gonna stop there.